Greetings, YouTube. Time for some blinking lights and a lighter tone in the videos I just shot. So I found myself thinking about rules aimed at controlling behavior of the players, not rules written to help construct a world where everything interacts and meshes and simulates whatever it is that you're particularly desiring to simulate at that moment does. What kind of rules do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. In P3.5 OGL and P1, wizards got 2 skill ranks per level, while many other folks got more than that. I think fighters got 4. And of course, the rogues, they got the most of any. Was it 8, I think? 6 or 8 they per level, something like that. Because they're supposed to be the skill monkeys. And while they're supposed to be the most versatile, the rogues are supposed to be able to do all kinds of different things. Remember, the wizards are the most academic. They're the guys that have rooms like this, filled with books, who spend all of their time reading and researching. And yet they have 2 skill ranks. Why? Because you see, if you're going to play a wizard, the stat you're going to pump the much is intelligence, which means a first level wizard is probably going to come out of the gate with +3 ranks at first level, and if you've playing with a point buy that allows it, maybe even possibly +5 ranks if they throw their their species bonus in there. So they could start the first level with 7 ranks. That's a lot of ranks now, isn't it? But they're the most academic people in the world. No one is more academically inclined than the wizard folks. So why shouldn't they have a lot of skill ranks? Why shouldn't they know a lot of things? But because the people who write the games know that the players are going to pump their intelligence up, and for some reason they are terrified by a player having a lot of skill ranks, even though a person could be playing a rogue with a +4 at first level on top of the 6 or 8 they get because of their class, and that's perfectly acceptable to the rules. But a wizard doing it isn't. I don't get that. I never have. But other kinds of rules are like that all the time. And what I'm thinking of recently is charming in 5th edition as a good example. I've read a lot of 5th edition, really. I know I haven't done a review. Who knows when I'm going to do it. So yeah, it'll happen when it happens. And read a lot of monster stats. A lot of monster stats. I like monster books, okay? And one of the things I noticed is that a lot of creatures have immunity to charm. Now, some creatures having immunity to charm makes perfect sense. Like if they're the Fae, or say they're from another dimension, or they're like aboleths and mind flayers and something like that. Okay, there are creatures that make perfect sense that they would be immune to charm. You could even argue that there are some creatures that should be immune to charms because they're so stupid, like oozes. Okay, yeah, you can't charm an ooze. They have no mind to charm. But there are a high percentage of creatures in 5th edition that are immune to charm. And I can find no reason why within the context of the world or the context of the creature. There's no explanation why this creature has a defense against charm, because that isn't in the stat block describing the creature's existence. It's in the stat block to prevent players from charming the monster and using the monster against the GM. The rule has been written so that players cannot control those creatures, because in the past it was very common for wizards, and by extension sorcerers and such, to control the minds of creatures and use those creatures against the GM. You know how many times we did that in the past? How common it was under, 1st through 3rd? Absolutely. 1st through all the way up through P1? Damn common. It's something that happens all the time. You charm the creature, and suddenly you've got a gateway past whatever it is that the GM's put in your way. You're just going right around that gate because maybe it could be because you've charmed a guard. Maybe it's because you've charmed a monster and turned them around and said, go over there and mess up that dude, even though he's the one that summoned you. that kind of thing. And so they built this rule into the system to prevent that. And that's not a rule aimed at the world. That's a rule aimed at the player. And I don't like that. I don't like rules aimed at players. It bothers me. If you aren't willing to accept the ramifications of players doing things in the world that you allow, that's bad writing. Another thing is magic items. P2 and 5th edition limit the number of magic items you can carry. Now, or align yourself with, I guess. Now, if I'm getting that wrong, if I'm mixing those two systems up, I've read a lot of them recently, so maybe there's a possibility of my getting the beams crossed on this one. But I know that I've seen it in a number of systems recently where you can't have multiple magic items aligned with you. Sure, you can carry them, but you can't use them. You haven't tuned yourself to them, so you don't have any access to them. And the use of wands and potions is more restricted. Wands don't do the same thing they used to do in the past. A wand isn't a stick filled with a single spell that you can point anytime you want to and go, thap, 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 thap. Oh, this is a knife. You get the point. That isn't how the wands in the world exist anymore, how they work. Why? Because in the past, players would load themselves up with potions and wands that do all kinds of versatile things, and they would only use them when it was, when they were low on something, or they were taking a break, so they wanted to heal themselves up. So they used the wand of Cure Light Wounds. And so between battles, players were able to recover completely, or almost completely, before they had the next encounter, which rolls into the last thing I would like to talk about, which is short and long breaks. Now, a number of systems have taken into account the short and long break. I think 4th edition did. I remember I don't consider 4th edition to be in D&D. I know people will tell me I'm wrong. Okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to mine. But the concept of short and long breaks is brilliant on one level because it's very versatile. The writers knew that under P1 and OGL and all the older systems of D&D, players would load up on spells, on potions and scrolls and wands, and recover after an encounter where within the context of the world, the GM very much wanted them to be beat down from encounter to encounter so that it would be more of a challenge and a risk over time. Their resources are getting low, except they had so many resources, their resources never really got low. They were able to recover, so they were going into each encounter pretty much as fresh as a daisy at the beginning of the day. So along comes the short and long rest, where they says, okay, we know that under the old system people did that, so we're going to create rules where they can't do that. But we're also going to put the short rest in, which lets them recover a little. But now we, the writers of the writers of the rules, control how much they can recover. So these are about rules controlling the behavior of the player, of the meat space person sitting at the table or in front of the character in case of an online game, the camera in case of an online game. Rules written to control the behavior of the player. Now, I do admit that the short-long rest thing is great if a GM wants to create a different kind of world. I think the rule for it now, it's a short rest is an hour and a long rest is 8. So lunchtime and a nap at night. You get the point. But if a GM wants to play a really harsh, grim and gritty game, he just says a short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is a week. So now resources have to really be husbanded. You have to hold those cleave them to your chest and not waste a single thing, because otherwise you will die. And there are people who want to play in that kind of game, and that's fine. But the beauty of the short, long rest thing is those definitions can be whatever the GM wants them to be. So that they can shorten them or they can widen them as much as they want, which gives them a lot of flexibility about the world they want to create. And I think that's actually kind of brilliant. But don't be mistaken. These were created to counter the actions of players in the past who loaded themselves up with scrolls and potions and wands and did things that the GMs didn't want, even though the world let them do it, even though the rules let them do it. Which is why I'm against a lot of the modern games I'm reading. They're supposed to be the traditional tabletop games, not narrative games, which I don't particularly like either, but traditional D&D. And these rules are being written to control the behavior of the players. And that bothers me. If you can't accept the fact that the world will let the players and their characters charge up on magic items at a certain level in the campaign because they've got the resources to do it, don't be a GM. Go do something else. That's part of the world. Now, maybe you could find a way of restricting that to an extent. You can make resources rare so they can't do that. Okay, fine. But you're doing that to control the actions of the players. And don't kid yourself that you're not. And while I realize that the rules do exist to control the actions of characters in the world, that some characters can't do some things and some characters can do some things because that's the roles they play, I accept that. That makes sense. There's a reason that, wizards aren't great hand-to-hand combatants, and, clerics don't necessarily know how to pick locks and things like that. But when you write rules to control the actions of the players, that bothers me. That's a level of meta that I don't like. So let's talk about this kind of thing. Do you think it has a place in our community, in our hobby? Do you think that the rules should be written so that the players cannot do certain things and are forced to do certain actions, whether they want to or not, even though there isn't necessarily any in-world game reason for that? Why can you only attune yourself to a certain number? I don't know. I haven't read it. I haven't seen any in-world justification for that. It's in the rules. It says that you can only attune yourself to a certain number of magic items. It makes life a hell of a lot easier for the GM. But I haven't read anything in a setting that says why you can't. It's just being imposed from the outside, and it seems very clunky to me. It seems very ham-handed. It seems like, well, people in the past did things that we didn't like, so we're going to slap their hands and we're going to keep them from doing it again. I guess I don't want my rules to have child safety caps on them. And that's what this feels like. It feels like somebody's slapping child safety caps again and again and again on the systems that I don't think need them. So let's talk about rules that control the actions of the players as opposed to their characters. I hope I've made that definition clear enough for folks. I've blathered on long enough now. But yeah, let's talk about this. Because I find it fascinating as well as disturbing.